Before I go any further, let me say this quietly, because moments like these matter. If this story already feels a little too familiar, you are not imagining it. A lot of us have stood in that same emotional space, pretending we were fine when something inside us had already cracked. If you want to hear stories like this, the kind that do not rush healing and do not sugarcoat reality, you can support this space by liking the video and subscribing. Not because you have to, because it tells me you want more conversations like this one. And if any part of this situation has happened to you, drop a comment. I read them. We read each other here. Now, let me take you back to where this really began. That moment by the suitcase looks simple on the surface. A man deciding, a woman watching, an ending that feels sudden. But it was not sudden at all. It only looked that way because everything leading up to it had been quiet. Too quiet. I tell you about that night first because it explains everything that came after. The calm, the restraint, the choices I made that surprised even me. Without that moment, nothing else makes sense. Because when someone looks at you and decides your worth out loud, something fundamental shifts. You stop reacting. You start seeing patterns you ignored for years. Little comments that felt harmless, jokes that landed wrong but were brushed off. The way his confidence grew every time I shrank myself to keep the peace. That night did not break me. It clarified me. Still, to understand why I did not cry, why I did not chase him down the hallway, why I let him pack without stopping him, you need to know what came before. Not the highlight reel, the real version, the slow build, the part nobody warns you about. This is where I need to rewind, back to when his voice sounded different, back to when being chosen felt mutual, back to when I believed love meant compromise instead of disappearance. If you have ever looked back at a relationship and wondered when things quietly changed, you already understand why this matters. These moments never announce themselves. They stack, one by one, until a single sentence exposes everything. That sentence by the suitcase was not the beginning. It was the reveal. So let me take you back to how we met. Not the romantic version, the honest one. Because once you see the starting point clearly, the ending stops feeling confusing. And you will understand why I did what I did next. I met him on a Thursday that felt completely ordinary at the time. The kind of day you forget until it becomes the beginning of everything. I was standing in line at a coffee shop near my office, half listening to a podcast, half thinking about deadlines, when he stepped behind me and said, "That drink order is ambitious for this early." I turned around, annoyed at first, then curious. He smiled like he was not trying too hard. Not flashy, not loud, just present. The kind of presence that feels safe before it feels exciting. We talked while waiting, about work, about the city, about nothing important. And somehow it felt easy. That should have been my first clue. He asked questions, real ones, not the kind people ask while waiting for their turn to speak. He listened like my answers mattered. When our drinks came, he hesitated for a second, then asked if I wanted to sit. No pressure, no expectation, just an option. I said yes. That hour stretched into 2. By the time we left, the sky had changed, and so had something else. That subtle feeling you get when you know this person will matter, even if you do not yet know why. He texted me that night. Not immediately, not 3 days later. Right in that perfect middle space that feels intentional. "I like today," the message said. "I would like to see you again." No games, no guessing. That consistency became his signature. Dates turned into routines. Routines turned into comfort. Comfort turned into trust. He showed up when he said he would. Remembered details I forgot I had shared. Asked about my work, my family, the things that shaped me before he existed in my life. When I spoke, he listened. When I hesitated, he reassured. When I doubted myself, He seemed confident enough for both of us. That mattered more than I realized at the time. Because here is the truth nobody says out loud. Trust does not always come from grand gestures. It comes from repetition, from reliability, from the slow accumulation of moments where someone proves they are safe. He felt safe. I introduced him to my friends, and they liked him instantly. He was charming in that understated way that makes people lean in. Polite, attentive, never tried to dominate the room. My family approved too. He asked my parents thoughtful questions. He helped clear plates without being asked. He made effort without making it performative. I noticed all of it. When he talked about his future, he included me without hesitation. When he talked about success, it sounded like something we would build together. That word, together, did a lot of work in my mind. There were small moments that sealed it. Him calling to check if I got home safe. Him remembering my coffee order before I did. Him defending me lightly when someone made an offhand comment at a dinner party. Those moments created a narrative. The narrative said, "This man sees me." So when he suggested we move in together, it felt natural, like the next logical step, not a risk. Living together deepened the rhythm. Shared groceries, shared mornings, shared silences that did not feel awkward. He was affectionate, not overbearing, present in a way that made me feel chosen. When work stressed him out, I supported him. When my own confidence wavered, he reassured me. Or at least, that is how it felt then. Looking back, I see how trust can grow in quiet spaces, how easy it is to mistake stability for equality, how warmth can distract you from imbalance. But at the time, I believed in us completely. I believed that love meant showing up. I believed that partnership meant compromise. I believed that if two people cared enough, everything else would work itself out. That belief shaped every decision that followed. It made me patient. It made me understanding. It made me willing to bend when things felt slightly off. Because when someone owns your trust early, you protect that image of them fiercely, even when cracks start to appear. And those cracks did appear. Not all at once, not loudly, just enough to ignore. At least that is what I told myself. Because when trust is built slowly and sincerely, it takes a long time to accept that it might have been conditional all along. And that realization was still waiting for me. The shift did not arrive with shouting or sla. It slipped in quietly, dressed as concern. It started with comments that sounded harmless, helpful even. He would tilt his head slightly and say things like, "You do not need to stress about that," or "That is probably not worth your energy." At first I appreciated it. It felt like care, like someone trying to make my life easier. Then the suggestions became corrections. He began editing my stories when I told them in groups, finishing my sentences, clarifying what I meant. Before I had the chance, people laughed and I laughed too, because that felt easier than explaining why it bothered me. I told myself it was nothing, just confidence, just his personality. But confidence has a tone, and his started to sound like certainty over me. When I talked about my work, he nodded politely, then redirected the conversation to his own projects, not abruptly, smoothly, like he was guiding traffic. If someone asked me a follow-up question, he answered it for me, smiling, like he was helping. Later, in private, he would say, "I just think people respond better when things are simplified." Simplified. That word stuck with me longer than it should have. He framed his opinions as logic, as realism, as maturity. Whenever I pushed back, he would sigh softly and say, "You are taking this personally," or "You are reading too much into it." Those phrases did more damage than outright insults ever could, because they made me doubt my instincts. He began to joke about my ambitions in ways that landed just shy of disrespect. Little laughs, little eye rolls, comments about how I was comfortable or content, said with a tone that suggested settling. At dinners with friends, he told stories where I played the background role, supportive, easy, predictable, never the center. If I spoke up, he would squeeze my knee under the table, a silent signal, calm down. And the thing is, there was never a moment dramatic enough to point to. Nothing explosive, nothing obvious, just a steady erosion of space. I started asking for his opinion before making decisions I never needed help with before. What to wear, what to say, whether something I felt was worth addressing. He always had an answer, and his answers always sounded reasonable. That is how quiet control works. It does not feel like control. It feels like guidance. He praised me when I stayed small, when I was agreeable, when I fit neatly into the version of me he liked presenting to others. "You are so easy," he would say, like it was a compliment, and I absorbed it like one. When I disagreed with him, his tone changed. Still calm, still controlled, but colder, dismissive. "I do not think you see the bigger picture," he would say. Or, "You are being emotional right now." That word again, emotional. It became the catch-all explanation for anything he did not want to engage with. My discomfort, my frustration, my questions. Over time, I noticed I was speaking less, choosing words more carefully, editing myself before he had the chance to do it for me. That should have scared me. Instead, I told myself relationships require adjustment. Here is something nobody warns you about. When someone slowly teaches you that your reactions are excessive, you begin to shrink them preemptively. And he noticed. He started making decisions without consulting me. Small ones at first. Weekend plans, guest lists, purchases that affected both of us. When I asked, he said, "I thought you would be fine with it." And I was. Or at least, I acted like it. Because pushing back felt exhausting. Like swimming upstream against a current that always led back to me being the problem. He talked more about levels and growth and standards, not in abstract ways. Personally, about the kind of people who succeed, the kind of couples who look right together, the kind of women who elevate a man. I noticed how rarely he used my name in those conversations. Sometimes he would compare us to others. Casually, almost playfully. "Look at them," he would say. "They are both so driven." I smiled. I nodded. I swallowed whatever reaction tried to surface. Inside, something tightened. But there were good moments too. Enough of them to keep me anchored. Laughter, affection, familiar routines that made the discomfort feel temporary. That balance kept me quiet. If you have ever wondered why people stay when something feels off, this is why. The disrespect is subtle. The control is quiet, and the ego is wrapped in charm. He never raised his voice. He never insulted me outright. He never needed to. Because he was slowly rewriting the rules. And I was slowly adjusting to them. By the time I realized I was being diminished, I had already helped normalize it. The hardest part to admit is this. I loved the version of him from the beginning so much that I kept explaining away the version standing in front of me. That explanation habit would cost me more than I realized. Because once someone believes they are superior in a relationship, respect becomes optional. And he had already started treating it that way. I did not wake up one day and decide to disappear. It happened in pieces, small choices, quiet sacrifices. The kind nobody applauds and everyone expects. I stopped correcting him in public first. It felt easier to let things slide than to deal with the tension that followed when I spoke up. I told myself it was maturity, that picking battles was part of being in a serious relationship. Then I stopped sharing ideas that excited me, not because I ran out of them, but because his responses always felt slightly off. Too quick, too dismissive. He would nod, then pivot, then talk about something else, like my thoughts were background noise. After a while, I learned to keep them to myself. I changed how I dressed without fully realizing it. Less bold, less noticeable. Clothes that blended instead of stood out. He never asked me to. He did not have to. His silence did the work for him. "You look fine," he would say, which somehow felt worse than criticism. I adjusted my schedule around his, rearranged priorities, canceled plans with friends because he looked tired or stressed. I became flexible, available, easy. He praised that version of me often. "You were low maintenance," he would say, smiling like he meant loyal, not like other people. I absorbed that praise like proof I was doing something right. Slowly, my world got smaller. Conversations revolved around his work, his goals, his frustrations. I listened. I supported. I encouraged. When I talked about my own exhaustion, he suggested rest, time off, stepping back. I learned the moods, the timing, when to speak, when to stay silent. That kind of awareness wears you down. I stopped recognizing myself in mirrors. Not physically, emotionally. The spark that once felt obvious now flickered inconsistently. I felt capable but unseen, strong but muted. And the worst part? He seemed happier, more confident, more relaxed, like my shrinking made him larger. That realization sat heavy in my chest, even when I refused to name it. There were nights I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had last felt fully awake in my own life, wondering when compromise had turned into self-erasure. I kept going anyway, because leaving felt drastic, because staying felt familiar, because admitting something was wrong meant admitting I had allowed it. That internal conflict is exhausting. It drains you slowly, quietly, until you wake up one day feeling older than your age and unsure why. I became the dependable one, the understanding. I became the dependable one, the understanding one, the one who held everything together while quietly falling apart. And no one questioned it, not even me, until the weight became impossible to ignore, until exhaustion turned into numbness, until I realized I was spending more energy maintaining the relationship than living inside it. That realization did not explode. It settled. And once it settled, there was no pretending it did not exist. Because when you shrink yourself long enough, the body remembers who you were before, and it starts asking questions you can no longer silence. Questions I was about to be forced to answer. The moment did not arrive during a fight. It arrived on an ordinary evening, wrapped in exhaustion and familiarity, which somehow made it worse. We were sitting across from each other at the dining table, half-finished plates between us, the television murmuring in the background. He was scrolling through his phone, barely present, nodding occasionally as if listening was optional. I said something small, almost harmless. "I have been feeling a little lost lately." He did not look up. "That happens when people stop pushing themselves," he replied, casual, distracted. "You have gotten comfortable." Comfortable. That word again. I waited. Part of me expected him to soften it, to add something kind, something reassuring. Instead, he put his phone down and finally met my eyes. "You know," he said, measured and calm, "I think this is why I have been questioning us." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, confident, settled into the moment like he had rehearsed it. "I just feel like I am growing," he said, "and you are staying the same. My friends keep saying it too." There it was, friends. They think I could do better, he added. Someone more impressive. Someone who matches where my life is going. That sentence did not sting. It sliced. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how easily they left his mouth. Like he was stating a fact. Like my worth was a topic already discussed, already agreed upon, already decided without me in the room. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but it stopped there. No tears fell. Something else took their place. Clarity. In that moment, I saw the pattern all at once. Every joke, every dismissal, every time I made myself smaller so he could feel larger, every excuse I made for him because I loved the version of him I met. That version was gone, and the man sitting across from me was not confused. He was convinced. I realized something quietly devastating. He was not asking if I was okay. He was informing me that I was inadequate. If you have ever been told, calmly and confidently, that you are the problem, you know exactly how this feels. That sharp drop in your chest. That sudden stillness where emotion pauses and something colder steps in. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I did not list everything I had sacrificed. Instead, I asked one question. Do you actually hear yourself right now? He smiled slightly, like he thought I was finally understanding. I am just being honest. In that quiet room, with half-eaten dinner and years of shared life hanging between us, I felt something inside me disconnect. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. That sentence changed how I saw him, and once that changed, nothing else could stay the same. I did not know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done shrinking, and he had no idea what that would cost him. The truth did not arrive all at once. It surfaced the way uncomfortable. Quietly, accidentally, when you are not looking for them yet, but somehow already braced for impact. It started with his phone lighting up on the kitchen counter. I was rinsing a glass, half present, half exhausted, when a notification appeared. A name I did not recognize. A preview I was never meant to see. She really is holding you back. My hand froze under the running water. I told myself not to assume anything, that this could mean anything, that context mattered. I dried my hands slowly, buying time, pretending calm still lived in my body. The phone buzzed again. You deserve someone on your level. That was when the shock hit. Not explosive, paralyzing. I stared at the screen like it might change if I waited long enough. My chest felt tight, not from heartbreak yet, but from disbelief. This was not a stranger. This was someone comfortable enough to comment on my place in his life. When I picked up the phone, my hands did not shake. That surprised me. The messages open. No password, no secrecy. Like he never imagined I would look, or like he never thought I mattered enough to hide it. The thread was long, weeks, maybe months. I read slowly, line by line, each message peeling back another layer of something I had been sensing but refusing to name. They talked about me like I was not a person, like I was a phase, a placeholder, a version of his life that no longer fit his image. She is nice, but she is comfortable. She does not really push herself. I feel like I have outgrown her. I had to sit down. The pain arrived next. Not sharp, heavy, pressing, the kind that makes breathing feel optional. These were not complaints whispered in frustration. These were narratives, rehearsed, reinforced, agreed upon. And then I saw it, receipts, not financial ones yet, emotional ones, screenshots of conversations he shared with others, inside jokes about my predictability, comments about how easy I was, how little resistance I offered. Someone wrote, "At least she makes your life simple." He replied with a laughing emoji. I closed my eyes just for a second. The humiliation burned, but something else followed it. Anger, clean and precise. I opened his email next. That was when the story widened. Emails between him and friends planning trips I was not invited to. Conversations about introductions to people I had never met. Messages discussing what his life could look like without me. Like I was already gone. Then came the financial clarity. Bank statements, shared accounts, transfers I recognized immediately because I had made them. Over and over again, quietly. I pulled up my own records. The numbers lined up too perfectly to ignore. Months where his income dipped and mine covered the difference. Payments for things he had claimed as his own accomplishments. Purchases he never questioned because the money was always there. I felt the pain shift again, this time into understanding. I realized something devastatingly clear. While he was telling people I was holding him back, I was the one quietly holding everything together. That realization hurt more than the messages, because it reframed everything. The dinners I paid for when he said money was tight. The subscriptions I covered without mentioning. The silence I kept to protect his pride. I found emails from myself to myself. Notes, attachments, contracts, proof of work he barely acknowledged. I had not hidden my life. He had never bothered to look. The shock faded, the pain softened. Clarity took its place. I saw how the story had been written, how my quiet strength had been mistaken for lack of ambition, how my support had been rebranded as dependency, how my shrinking had become his evidence. I sat there for a long time, documents open, messages still glowing on the screen. This was not betrayal in a single act. This was betrayal through assumption. And suddenly, his words at the table made Sile, a confidence, this certainty. He had been rehearsing this ending with an audience that never knew me. That was the moment the sadness loosened its grip, because grief requires confusion. And I was no longer confused. I closed the laptop carefully, not dramatically, intentionally. What I felt next was not revenge. It was resolve. He thought he knew my worth because he never asked for proof. That was about to change. And the next step would not be emotional. It would be deliberate. The crying stopped before I expected it to. One moment, I was sitting there, documents open, chest tight, eyes burning. The next, everything went quiet inside me. Not empty, focused. That was new. I wiped my face once, not dramatically, not urgently, just enough to clear my vision. I noticed how steady my breathing felt, how my hands no longer shook, how the ache in my chest had settled into something sharper and more useful. Clarity. I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked the same. Lights changed. Life continued at a pace that suddenly felt reassuring. The world had not ended. Only a story had. And stories can be rewritten. I did not confront him. That impulse passed quickly. There was nothing left to ask, no confusion to resolve. The messages had answered every question I did not know how to phrase. I realized something important right then. Pain demands reaction. Clarity demands strategy. I sat back down, opened a new folder on my laptop, and labeled it simply. Dates, names, records, not anger, organization. I started listing facts, not feelings. Facts do not argue back. What was mine, what I paid for, what I built quietly while he narrated a different version of reality to his friends. The more I documented, the calmer I became. There is something grounding about truth when it is written down cleanly. No tone, no spin, just evidence. I stopped replaying conversations. I stopped wondering what I could have said differently. That loop ended. Instead, I asked better questions. What do I want to protect? What do I need to prepare? What does walking away with dignity actually require? I thought about timing, about leverage, about silence. I remembered something I once heard a woman say at a dinner party years ago. The most powerful move is not reacting first, it is reacting last. That line came back to me with surprising clarity. I decided then that whatever came next would not be loud, it would not be chaotic. It would not look like revenge. It would look like composure. I moved through the apartment differently after that. Still, observant, like someone watching a scene unfold rather than starring in it. He talked. I listened. He complained. I noted. He assumed. I planned. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer trying to be understood. I was preparing to be finished. The exhaustion that had followed me for months lifted slightly, not because things were resolved, but because I was no longer fighting myself. That kind of relief is subtle, but unmistakable. I slept that night without replaying his words, without rehearsing conversations, without shrinking. In the morning, I woke up clear-headed. The pain had done its job. Now it was time to be precise, and he still had no idea what phase he had just pushed me into. The plan did not begin with confrontation. It began with restraint. I gave myself one rule before doing anything else. Every move had to be clean, legal, ethical, nothing impulsive, nothing that could be used against me later. I was done reacting. This phase required patience. I started by separating emotion from action. Emotion had already served its purpose. It opened my eyes. Now it needed to step aside. The first thing I did was inventory. Quietly, methodically. I gathered documents the way someone prepares for a long journey. Bank statements, email threads, contracts, screenshots, payment confirmations. Dates mattered. Timelines mattered. Patterns mattered. Every transfer I had ever made went into a folder, not dramatized, labeled. Rent, utilities, trips, large purchases he claimed as his own. The evidence told a story he never bothered to learn. I made copies, digital and physical, stored securely, backed up, then backed up again. There is something empowering about knowing the truth is organized, that it exists independently of memory or emotion. Next came legal awareness. I did not announce anything. I did not threaten. I did not hint. I booked a consultation with a lawyer recommended by someone who specialized in discretion. A woman who listened more than she spoke. I laid the documents out calmly. No backstory, no venting, just facts. She reviewed everything carefully and nodded once. "You have been carrying more than you realize," she said. That sentence landed differently now, not as validation, as confirmation. She explained my options, what was mine, what needed protection, what silence could preserve, what timing could change. I asked one question: how do I walk away without losing myself or my work? Her answer was simple: preparation. I did not rush. I did not file anything yet. This was not about speed. It was about positioning. At home, I observed more than I spoke. I noticed how relaxed he seemed, how confident, how certain he was that I would stay in my lane, that my silence meant acceptance. He started talking more openly about the future he imagined, the trips, the people, the version of himself he was becoming. He assumed I was still listening as his partner. I was not. I was listening as someone closing a chapter. I stopped overgiving, quietly. No announcements, no explanations. When he asked why something was delayed, I said I had been busy. When he asked if something was handled, I said I would get to it. I let him feel the absence without naming it. Patience is a powerful filter. It reveals how much someone expects from you when you stop offering freely. I prepared logistics next: accounts, access, boundaries. I changed nothing abruptly. I just made sure nothing depended on me without intention. At night, I wrote lists. Not angry ones, practical ones. What needs to be protected? What needs to be untangled? What does closure look like on my terms? The idea of revenge shifted during this time. It stopped being about proving him wrong. It became about reclaiming control. True power does not announce itself early. It waits until there is no room for denial. I knew I would not confront him in private. That would invite arguments, minimization, gaslighting, revisionist history. This story required witnesses, a moment where truth could exist without interruption. That was when the final piece fell into place. A public setting, controlled, civil, impossible to rewrite later, not dramatic, definitive. I marked the date quietly. Until then, I stayed a say. I laughed when appropriate, nodded when expected, played my role convincingly. Not because I was weak, because I was ready. There is a particular calm that comes when you know you are prepared, when you stop asking for fairness and start creating it. Every day that passed made the plan stronger, and every day he grew more comfortable. That comfort was not an accident. It was the setup, because when the moment arrived, he would not be ready, and I would not need to raise my voice to be heard. 10 days before, that was when the date stopped feeling theoretical and started feeling close enough to touch. I wrote it at the top of my planner in clean, steady ink. No hearts, no drama. Just a square around the number. 10 days. I woke up at 6:12 a.m. that morning, not from an alarm, but from that alert feeling you get when something important is coming. The apartment was quiet. He was still asleep. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the city stretch awake. My hands were steady again. That mattered. 9 days before, at 8:47 p.m., he mentioned the event casually, like it was already decided. A dinner. People he respected. People whose opinions mattered to him. He said it with a smile that assumed my presence was automatic. I nodded once. Inside, I noted the guest list forming. Faces, names, history. The room where truth would have nowhere to hide. 8 days before, 12:03 p.m., I received a confirmation email. Reservation secured. Private room. Equipment approved. The details locked into place with a calm click that felt final. I forwarded nothing. I saved everything. 7 days before, at 7:26 a.m., he complained about stress, about pressure, about how people expected so much from him. I listened without interrupting, like I always had. Only this time, I listened differently. I noticed how easily he talked about expectations while assuming mine were endless. That assumption would not survive the week. 6 days before, 5:58 p.m., I reviewed the documents again. Numbers lined up, dates aligned, nothing missing, nothing exaggerated. Just truth, neatly arranged. I closed the folder and felt a small wave of relief. Preparation creates its own confidence. 5 days before, at 9:14 p.m., he laughed at something on his phone and said, "You would not get it." That sentence used to sting. This time it landed flat. I smiled politely and let the silence do the work. 4 days before, 6:40 a.m., I went for a walk alone. The air felt crisp, clear, the kind of morning that sharpens focus. I thought about timing, about pacing, about how anticipation grows when nothing obvious changes. At home, he noticed nothing. 3 days before, at 11:02 a.m., a message arrived that confirmed a final detail. I read it twice, then once more, slowly. Everything was aligned now. The tension shifted. It stopped buzzing and settled into something heavier, denser, like the air before a storm that refuses to announce itself. 2 days before, 10:19 p.m., he asked what I was wearing to the dinner. His tone was casual, evaluative. Something simple, I said. That answer pleased him. One day before, at 4:55 a.m., I woke before dawn. Not anxious, alert, ready. I made a list in my head, not on paper. Everything was already where it needed to be. Later that evening, he was distracted, restless, talking too much. He sensed something, even if he could not name it. I noticed, the day of. 7 a.m. I stood in the shower and let the water run a little longer than usual. Not to calm myself, to mark the transition. By 6:30 p.m., the anticipation had thickened. Every hour that passed made backing out impossible. Every minute narrowed the path forward until there was only one direction left. I checked the time once more. 7:42 p.m. Almost there. The tension was no longer inside me. It was waiting in the room ahead. And for the first time in a long while, I did not feel small walking toward it. The doors opened at 7:58 p.m. The room filled slowly, exactly the way these things always do. Laughter arrived before meaning, perfume before conversation, the soft clink of glasses before anyone said anything that mattered. I stood near the window, posture relaxed, expression neutral. From the outside, I looked like I belonged there effortlessly. That part was not an act. The first guests greeted us with familiar warmth. Compliments, light teasing, questions about work, travel, plans. I answered easily, smiling at the right moments, keeping my voice steady. No one suspected anything. That was the point. He looked comfortable, energized. This was his environment, people he respected, people whose opinions shaped his sense of worth. I watched him work the room. He spoke confidently, gestured easily, introduced me as an afterthought, like punctuation in his sentence. "This is my wife," he said, then continued talking without pausing to see if anyone had questions. I noticed who leaned in when he spoke, who nodded too eagerly, who scanned the room while pretending to listen. Power dynamics reveal themselves quickly when you are paying attention. I accepted a glass when one was offered. I did not drink yet. Across the room, someone laughed too loudly at something he said. He smiled wider. That smile used to feel familiar. Tonight, it felt studied. I scanned faces. There was the friend who always questioned my ambition. The one who once asked what I did all day since I worked from home. The couple who mirrored us at dinner parties, at least on the surface. The colleague who treated me kindly, but never asked follow-up questions. Everyone looked relaxed. False normalcy has a texture. Smooth, polished, convincing. I felt none of it. My inner voice stayed quiet, observant. This was not the time for reflection. This was the time for timing. At 8:12 p.m., everyone was seated. Menus opened. Small talk intensified. The kind of conversation that fills space without revealing anything. Vacation stories, work stress, mutual acquaintances. I participated just enough. When someone asked how things were going, I said, "Busy, but good," and left it there. Knowing pushed. People rarely do. He reached for my hand briefly under the table. A familiar gesture, reassuring to him. I let it happen. There was no reason to pull away yet. I noticed how often he spoke over me, how often he redirected attention back to himself. No one commented. This was normal, accepted, expected. I wondered how many times I had sat at tables like this before, quietly shrinking while calling it support. The thought passed quickly. At 8:27 p.m., appetizers arrived. Plates were shared. Wine was poured. The room settled into comfort. People leaned back in their chairs. Voices dropped. Guardedness softened. That was the danger of false normalcy. It convinces everyone they are safe. He leaned toward me and whispered, "You seem quiet tonight." "I am just listening," I replied. He smiled, satisfied. Listening was a role he understood. Inside, I counted breaths. At 8:41 p.m., I felt the shift. Not visible, internal. The moment when anticipation turns into certainty, when preparation meets opportunity, when waiting stops feeling passive and starts feeling intentional. I set my glass down untouched. Around the table, conversations overlapped. Someone made a joke. Someone else checked their phone. No one noticed the stillness settling over me. They would, soon, because everything looked normal. And that was exactly why what came next would land the way it needed to. Normalcy creates contrast, and contrast makes truth impossible to ignore. The room settled into that comfortable hum people mistake for safety. Cutlery paused, glasses lowered. Someone laughed at a joke that did not land quite right. I waited until the sound faded on its own. I did not rush it. Silence has weight when you let it breathe. I stood up slowly. Every movement felt deliberate, not stiff. Calm has its own gravity. Chairs shifted. A few heads turned. He looked at me, confused at first, then mildly irritated, like I had interrupted something important. "I just want to say something quickly," I said, my voice steady, conversational. "Since everyone we care about is here." He smiled, relieved. He thought this was gratitude, politeness, a supportive wife moment. That assumption lasted exactly 3 seconds. I glanced around the table, meeting eyes one by one. Not challenging, not apologetic, present. "A few weeks ago," I continued, "I was told that I was holding someone back, that I was comfortable, unimpressive, that I was no longer aligned with the life he wanted." A few brows furrowed. Someone shifted in their seat. He stopped smiling. "I was told this was not personal," I added calmly, "just honest." The air changed. I reached for my phone and connected it to the screen behind me. The first slide appeared. Clean, minimal. Dates, numbers. No commentary yet. "This is not a confrontation," I said, almost gently. "It is clarification." His face drained of color. The first document showed a timeline. Payments, transfers, regular, consistent. "For the last 18 months," I said, "I have covered the majority of our shared expenses. Quietly, by choice." Someone inhaled sharply. I did not look at him. I kept my focus forward. "During that same period," I continued, "I was described as lacking ambition." The next slide appeared. Contracts. Signed. Dated. My name was clear. "This is my work," I said. The work I was doing while being told I was too comfortable. Murmurs rippled across the table now. Not loud, unsettled. He pushed his chair back slightly. "This is not the time," he said, his voice tight. I smiled politely. "This is the only time," I replied. The next slide showed messages. Names blurred. Words clear. "She is holding you back. You could do better. She is easy." Someone gasped. I heard a chair scrape loudly as one person stood up, then sat back down, unsure what to do with their body. "These conversations happen without me," I said evenly. "About me, while I was funding the life being discussed." That was when control started to fracture. He stood abruptly. "You are twisting this," he said, louder now. "You never told me any of this mattered." I turned toward him for the first time. "I did not hide my life," I said calmly. "You did not ask." The room went still. I let that sentence sit. No rush. No follow-up. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands clenched at his sides. The next slide showed receipts, trips, purchases, things he proudly spoke about as his achievements. These were shared experiences, I said, paid for by me, without conditions, without recognition. Someone whispered my name, soft, disbelieving. I felt no rush, only relief. Truth feels lighter once it is spoken aloud. I am not sharing this to embarrass anyone, I continued. I am sharing it because silence has been mistaken for insignificance. His voice cracked. Why are you doing this here? I met his eyes fully now. Because this is where the story was written, I said. I'm just correcting it. He shook his head, laughing sharply, the sound brittle. You could have talked to me privately. I did, I replied. I told you I felt lost. You told me I was holding you back. Someone on his side of the table stood up. This is uncomfortable, they said. Yes, I answered, without apology. Truth usually is. The room was no longer calm. People shifted, whispered, checked their phones, probably already searching names, dates, confirming what they were seeing. He tried again, louder, desperate. You are making me look bad. I tilted my head slightly. I am not making you look like anything, I said. I am showing what already exists. That was the moment he lost control. He raised his voice. He gestured wildly. He accused, deflected, rewrote. Every reaction only sharpened the contrast. I stayed still. I did not argue. I did not interrupt. I did not defend. When he finally ran out of words, the silence returned heavier than before. I am done shrinking, I said quietly. This is not revenge. This is closure. I disconnected the screen. I wish you well, I added, turning toward him one last time. But I will not be small to make you feel large again. No applause followed. No dramatic exit music. Just stunned quiet. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. No shaking, no hesitation. Behind me, voices erupted. Questions, accusations, shock. I did not look back. Composure is powerful when chaos is expected. And I walked out knowing one thing with certainty. The truth does not need volume to be devastating. The consequences did not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. They arrived in silence, the kind that settles after a truth has been spoken out loud and no one knows how to rearrange themselves around it. I left the building and stepped into the night air without rushing. My phone stayed in my bag. I did not need to check it to know what was happening behind me. Energy shifts are loud, even when people are not. By the time I reached my car, my hands were still steady. That was how I knew I had done the right thing. The next morning, the ripple effects began. Messages came in slowly at first, short, careful. People choosing their words like they were walking on glass. I did not know. That must have been hard. You handled that with so much grace. No one defended him. That part mattered more than anything else. The respect in those messages felt different. Not pity, recognition. He, on the other hand, went quiet. No long explanations, no dramatic apologies, just absence. When someone loses control publicly, silence becomes the only place left to hide. Mutual friends stopped inviting us to the same things. Invitations became separate, neutral, deliberate. People do not like choosing sides, but they do notice behavior. At work events, I was asked questions directly now. Follow-ups, real curiosity. No one spoke over me. That shift was subtle, but unmistakable. I heard through others that he was angry, embarrassed, confused about how things got so out of hand. That phrasing told me everything I needed to know. People who feel entitled to silence always struggle when it ends. Days passed, then weeks. He tried once. A message that said we should talk, that there had been misunderstandings, that things did not need to end this way. I did not respond. Silence, when chosen, is not avoidance. It is a boundary. The most interesting part was watching how people treated him after. The admiration cooled. Conversations shortened. Compliments stopped flowing as freely. Not because of what I said, because of what he revealed. Confidence without integrity does not age well. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened to me. I slept better. The constant, low-level tension I had lived with for months lifted. My thoughts felt clearer, my body lighter. Even exhaustion felt cleaner, like it came from effort instead of emotional management. Respect returned to places I did not realize it had left. Not loudly, naturally. That is how karma works when truth does the work for you. There was no dramatic downfall for him. No public apology tour. No cinematic collapse. Just a quiet recalibration of how people saw him and how they saw me. I did not need to explain myself again. The silence said enough, because when the story changes, people listen differently. And when you stop shrinking, the space you reclaim does not need to be announced. It is felt. Everywhere. Rebuilding did not start with big decisions. It started with quiet ones. The first thing I changed was my morning routine. No more rushing. No more checking my phone before my feet hit the floor. I let my mornings belong to me again. Coffee tasted different when it was not shared with tension. I stopped explaining myself. That alone felt like shedding a heavy coat I did not realize I had been wearing for years. My identity began to stretch back into its full shape, not all at once, but steadily. I took up space in conversations. I finished sentences. I trusted my instincts without looking for approval in someone else's expression. Confidence returned in fragments at first. A straightened posture, a firmer voice, the ease of saying no without guilt. Healing is not dramatic. It is repetitive in the best way. Small choices made consistently until they become normal. I reorganized my home. Nothing symbolic, just practical. Moving furniture, clearing shelves, making room for things that felt like me again. The apartment stopped feeling like a shared compromise and started feeling intentional. People noticed the change before I did. "You seem lighter," someone said one afternoon. I was. Work felt different too, focused, energizing. I stopped minimizing my achievements when asked about them. I stated facts. Let them stand. That shift alone altered how people responded. I did not rush into anything new. No rebound narratives, no reinvention for an audience. Healing does not perform well, and it does not need to. I learned to sit with silence without filling it, to enjoy my own company without distraction, to trust that stillness did not mean emptiness. There were moments of grief. They came quietly, usually at night. Memories surfaced without warning. Not of conflict, but of tenderness. The early years. The person I thought I was building a life with. I let those moments pass without judgment. You can grieve what was while refusing to return to it. That was an important distinction. Confidence does not arrive as certainty. It arrives as clarity. Knowing what you will no longer tolerate. Knowing what you deserve without needing to negotiate for it. I stopped shrinking. That decision echoed everywhere. In how I dressed. In how I spoke. In how I moved through rooms. People adjusted. Some drifted away. Others leaned in. That sorting felt natural. I did not rebuild myself to prove anything. I rebuilt because living half visible had become exhausting. There is power in choosing yourself quietly. No announcements, no explanations, just alignment. And slowly, steadily, my life began to feel like mine again. Not louder, truer, and that made all the difference. Here is the truth most people never say out loud. Being quiet does not mean being weak. Being supportive does not mean being small. And being underestimated does not mean you lack value. It usually means someone else never bothered to look closely. If this story stirred something in you, pause for a moment and ask yourself one honest question. Have you ever made yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger? Many women learn early that love means patience, flexibility, understanding, and sacrifice. Those things are not wrong. But when love requires you to disappear, that is not partnership. That is erosion. The lesson here is not about revenge. It is about visibility. People will treat you based on the version of yourself you allow them to see. When you constantly downplay your needs, your dreams, your intelligence, others learn to do the same. Not always out of cruelty, often out of comfort. And here is the hard part. No one comes to save the woman who hides her strength. No one defends what they are never shown. This does not mean you need to announce your worth loudly. It means you must stop hiding it quietly. You do not need permission to take up space. You do not need validation to stand tall. You do not need someone else to recognize your value before you do. The moment you stop shrinking, the world adjusts. Some people will feel uncomfortable. Some will drift away. That is not loss. That is alignment. Respect follows clarity. And the most powerful thing you can do is decide, calmly and consistently, that you will no longer abandon yourself to keep peace with someone who benefits from your silence. Your life is not meant to be a background role in someone else's story. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to be whole, and you are allowed to choose yourself without apology. That is not selfish. That is survival with dignity. I did not walk away feeling victorious. I walked away feeling whole. For a long time, I thought strength looked like patience, like understanding, like staying quiet to keep the peace. I thought love meant shrinking just enough so someone else could stand taller beside me. I was wrong. Strength is knowing when to stop explaining. Power is choosing yourself without needing permission. Closure is not something someone gives you. It is something you claim. I did not lose a husband that night. I released a version of myself that was taught to stay small. The woman who walked out did not need applause. She did not need validation. She already knew who she was. I am not unremarkable. I never was. I was simply invisible to someone who never bothered to look. And now, I take up space quietly, fully, unapologetically. That is the kind of ending no one can take from you. Now, I want to hear from you. Put yourself in my place for a moment. If the person you loved looked you in the eye and told you they could do better, what would you have done next? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Would you have tried to prove your worth? Or would you have walked away and protected your dignity? There is no right or wrong answer here. There is only honesty. If you have ever been made to feel small, invisible, or replaceable in a relationship, share your story in the comments. Someone reading it might need to know they are not alone. Your words matter more than you realize. And tell me this too. If you were standing in that room, holding that truth, would you have revealed it or walked away silently? If this story resonated with you, tap the like button so more women can find it. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful, emotional stories about self-worth, quiet strength, and reclaiming your voice. And make sure notifications are on. The next story might feel uncomfortably familiar.